January 20th, 1942. The air in the small villa outside Berlin is heavy with smoke from the chimneys, the faint scent of pipe tobacco mingling with the chill of winter. Inside, the conversation is clinical, detached, almost mundane, yet the words spoken here will ripple across the continent and claim millions of lives. Men in dark overcoats sit around a long polished table, their breath fogging the cold air. Papers rustle. Pens scratch. A map of Europe is spread before them, dotted with symbols and notes. There is no shouting. No passion. Only the careful language of planning, of method, of calculation. And yet, the gravity of what they are deciding presses down like a weight on the room, invisible but undeniable. Outside, snow falls quietly, as if the world itself does not yet know what is coming. The Holocaust was not born overnight. It began long before the camps, before the ghettos, before the gas chambers. It began in ideology, in prejudice codified into law, in a society convinced that one group could be blamed for all misfortune. Anti-Semitism in Europe had centuries of history, but in Germany it took on a lethal, industrialized form under the National Socialist regime. Jews, Romani people, political dissidents, the disabled, and countless others were marked as enemies of the state. Identification cards, yellow stars, registries, small steps that would lead to mass extermination. The rise of Adolf Hitler was not a surprise in the chaos of post-World War I Germany. Economic collapse, humiliation from Versailles, and political unrest created fertile ground for radical ideas. Hitler's rhetoric, first in speeches and then in law, transformed prejudice into state policy. By 1933, Jewish businesses were boycotted, civil rights stripped, and propaganda flooded the streets and radios of Germany. Nuremberg laws in 1935 codified discrimination, forbidding Jews from marrying or associating with Aryans. This was bureaucracy as weapon, legalism as cruelty. Every form signed, every rule enforced, brought the world a step closer to unimaginable horror. By 1939, when the German army invaded Poland, the situation escalated from exclusion to violence. Jews were forced into ghettos, starved into submission, crowded into filthy, walled districts. Warsaw, Lodz, and Krakow became cages. Disease spread. Hunger gnawed at children. Families were separated. The SS and Gestapo patrolled every street. The world outside, still focused on diplomacy and war, barely understood the scale yet. The war itself became the vehicle for murder. The invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941 marked the first large-scale, systematic killing by shooting squads, the Einsatzgruppen. Men, often young and conscripted, followed orders to round up Jews, communists, and Roma, shooting them in forests and fields. Eyewitnesses described bodies stacked like firewood, landscapes scarred by mass graves. Some soldiers balked, some cried, but obedience prevailed in most cases. Psychological strain did not stop the killing. Instead, it led to more bureaucratic solutions. It was in this context that the decision to industrialize murder was made. By 1942, Nazi leaders sought efficiency, death by numbers, by machines, by chemicals. Camps were designed to kill on an unprecedented scale. Auschwitz-Birkenau, Treblinka, Sobibor, Majdanek, all names that would become synonymous with death. Trains would carry hundreds, sometimes thousands, each day, often crammed into cattle cars, stripped of dignity, thrown into a system designed to erase them completely. The smell of smoke, the sight of crematoria chimneys, the sounds of despair, these were the tools of terror. Yet even amid this horror, human stories persisted. Some resisted in tiny ways, messages smuggled in bread, hidden children, forged papers. Others documented, recorded, or risked everything to testify. The diaries of Anne Frank, the journals of Janusz Korczak, the memoirs of survivors like Elie Wiesel, all capture the tension between the human spirit and the machinery of death. The Holocaust was systematic, deliberate, and horrifyingly efficient. It was a convergence of ideology, technology, and war. Trains, gas chambers, industrial methods of murder, and meticulous record-keeping combined with the human capacity for cruelty to produce a genocide that defies comprehension. Millions disappeared, their lives erased but their memory preserved in records, photographs, and survivor testimony, and yet, the question remains, how did the world allow it to unfold, step by step, year by year? How did ordinary people become agents of such extraordinary evil? How did hatred become a machine that consumed 6 million Jewish lives and millions of others? As the snow melts in Europe and the war spreads across the continent, the machinery of death continues to roll, trains moving inexorably toward the east. In the ghettos, in forests, in cities, the population lives in fear, waiting, hoping, praying. And the world watches, some aware, many unwilling to see the scale. The Holocaust is no longer a distant idea. It is real, it is present, and it is growing, and somewhere deep in the forests of Poland, in the shadow of the death camps yet to be built, the first whispers of resistance begin to take shape. Small, almost invisible acts that will ripple across history, but can they change the course of a machine already in motion? March 15, 1942. Snow still clings to the outskirts of Krakow as trains rattle through the station, each car packed beyond capacity with people who once lived ordinary lives, shopkeepers, teachers, children, mothers. The air is thick with fear and the bitter cold. Wooden slats of the freight cars creak under weight, bodies pressed together, some crying silently, others staring blankly at the walls. The metallic tang of iron mixes with the acrid smoke from nearby factories. Soldiers bark orders. Dogs growl. Every whistle of the train, every clanging gate, becomes a heartbeat in a rhythm of terror. By early 1942, the Nazis had perfected a terrifying network, ghettos, transport, and extermination camps linked together by rails and bureaucracy. Auschwitz-Birkenau was emerging as the centerpiece. It was not just a camp, it was a factory of death. Men and women arrived by the thousands, separated within seconds into those deemed fit for labor and those destined for immediate execution. Gas chambers were camouflaged as showers. Doors slammed. Zyklon B, a cyanide-based pesticide, released invisible clouds of death. Within hours, hundreds perished. Their bodies burned in crematoria ovens, smoke rising like a grotesque monument over the fields, yet the scale alone does not capture the horror. Every detail was meticulously planned. Medical experiments were conducted under the guise of science, targeting children, twins, and the infirm. Prisoners were tattooed, catalogued, measured, dissected. Human beings reduced to numbers on lists, to data points in a system that calculated efficiency, logistics, and output. Resistance existed, though often invisible. In the Warsaw Ghetto, uprisings sparked in April 1943. Armed with pistols smuggled in, Molotovs, and sheer desperation, Jewish fighters held out for weeks against German forces. Fires raged through the cramped streets, smoke choking the alleys, screams cutting through the cold. Though ultimately crushed, the uprising sent a message. Even amid impossible odds, the human spirit refused to surrender entirely. Across Eastern Europe, similar acts flickered. Partisans in forests ambushed supply trains. Brave individuals hid children in attics, forests, and false walls. Some forged documents, some smuggled letters to the outside world. Every act of defiance was perilous, punishable by death, often of the entire family, but they persisted. Courage, small and fragile, persisted in the face of unimaginable machinery of death. The Holocaust was not confined to Eastern Europe. Western Europe, too, fell under its shadow. France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Norway were sites of deportation. Children ripped from homes. Families transported by train, often in broad daylight, to camps in Poland and Germany. Collaboration and complicity varied, but the reach was undeniable. Administrative systems, railway schedules, and even local police were integrated into a continent-wide network that turned ordinary infrastructure into instruments of genocide. Daily life in the camps was a study in horror and adaptation. Prisoners woke to the cry of guards, to the clang of bells signaling work or punishment. Starvation was constant. Bread, soup, a thin liquid of questionable nutrition. Those who resisted the dehumanization in small ways, cleaning a fellow prisoner, sharing a scrap of food, lived momentary victories in a world designed to crush hope. Medical experiments, forced labor, beatings, and selections for death occurred with regularity. Death was omnipresent, yet so was resilience. There were moments of fleeting humanity. Survivors later recalled hidden music, whispered prayers, and the sharing of secret stories. Letters hidden in shoes. Notes sewn into hems of clothing. These acts did not stop the killing, but they preserved the selfhood of the victims, a reminder that even in the abyss, people were people. Historians estimate that by the end of 1942, mass extermination had reached staggering proportions. Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor, Belzec, Chelmno, each camp processing thousands, sometimes tens of thousands, weekly. Trains from across Europe funneled lives into smoke and ash. The scale was industrial, methodical, terrifyingly efficient. Documentation was kept meticulously: registers, transport logs, death certificates, proof of a crime being committed with chilling precision. And yet, amidst the machinery, there were whispers, rumors, and fragments of news that reached the outside world. Allied governments were aware of the atrocities, though information was incomplete, fragmented, and at times, disbelieved. Reports of gas chambers, mass shootings, and the conditions in ghettos circulated through intelligence channels and refugee testimonies. For those trying to understand the full scope, the reality was almost too vast, too horrific to grasp. The Holocaust also forced a reckoning with bureaucracy and obedience. Ordinary men, clerks, train conductors, policemen, engineers, became instruments of death. Studies later showed that the machinery of murder relied not on fanatic killers alone, but on the participation of ordinary people following orders, filling forms, and maintaining schedules. It was a system where obedience replaced morality, and efficiency replaced empathy, and still, the killing escalated. 1943 would see further intensification: deportations from Italy, Hungary, and Greece, extermination programs accelerating in response to the tides of war. As German forces retreated from the Eastern Front under Soviet pressure, they attempted to erase evidence, burning bodies, destroying camps, and forcing prisoners on death marches in the dead of winter. Snow and mud claimed thousands more. Survivors later described the agony: frostbitten limbs, starvation, the sounds of those collapsing beside them. Survival became an act of sheer will. The Holocaust was not only physical, it was psychological. Fear became constant, hope dangerous, trust lethal. Children hid under floors, in basements, in forests, watching adults make impossible choices. Parents sacrificed themselves to save children. Friends vanished without trace. Families were reduced to fragments. And yet, through the despair, stories of courage persisted: those who smuggled food, who hid strangers, who documented atrocities, who dared to resist when resistance seemed meaningless. As the camps operated, the machinery of extermination reached perfection in its own grim way. Selection lines, barracks, crematoria, gas chambers, trains, and administration, all synchronized for maximum output. Each step was documented. Each death accounted for. And yet, even as the Nazis refined their methods, cracks appeared. Escape attempts, uprisings, intelligence leaks, and individual bravery began to expose the system's vulnerabilities. By mid-1943, the Holocaust had become a shadow over the entire continent. Millions had already perished. The death machine continued, and the world was watching in fragments, piecing together the horror. And in those fragmented glimpses, the unimaginable began to be understood. The question loomed larger with every passing month: how far would it go? How many more would suffer before the end? And somewhere in the chaos of Europe, prisoners whispered of liberation that seemed impossibly distant. They held on to tiny sparks of hope, to the thought that somehow, beyond the smoke and barbed wire, life could exist again. Yet the answer remained unknown. The system continued its relentless march: one train, one barrack, one life at a time. Here's part 3, climax plus conclusion of The Holocaust Unveiled, written to be cinematic, emotional, historically accurate, and reflective. January 27, 1945. The gates of Auschwitz are thrown open. Snow crunches under the boots of Soviet soldiers. Silence is broken by coughing, weak cries, the shuffling of thousands of emaciated bodies. The air smells of rot and smoke, of starvation and human suffering. Survivors blink at the light, unable at first to trust it, as if the world outside had become unreal. Some clutch onto each other, eyes wide with disbelief. Others collapse to their knees, staring at the rows of huts, the barbed wire, the chimneys still smoking faintly. Death had been here, in unimaginable numbers, and now, in the aftermath, life crawls back in small, tentative steps. Liberation did not erase the horror. It revealed it fully. Soldiers and journalists documented piles of corpses, skeletal figures, and the tools of murder: Zyklon B canisters, crematoria ovens, personal belongings stacked in warehouses. Photographs show rows of shoes, glasses, and hair, objects that had belonged to real people with families, names, and stories. The scale is incomprehensible, yet each item speaks volumes. Every shoe, every comb, every letter tells a life cut short. Eyewitness testimony poured in. Survivors spoke of selections, forced labor, the constant hunger, the fear, and, in rare instances, small acts of kindness. They told of clandestine notes, hidden children, and fleeting moments of humanity. Memoirs like Elie Wiesel's Night would later make the world confront the emotional and psychological toll of genocide, the trauma carried for decades. Even after liberation, the aftermath extended far beyond the camps. Europe was littered with death marches, destroyed communities, and displaced survivors. Millions wandered in search of family, food, and shelter. Entire towns had been emptied, entire communities erased. Historians estimate that by the end of 1945, over 6 million Jews and millions of others, including Romani people, disabled individuals, and political prisoners, had been murdered. Each number represents a human life, a story, a world lost. Trials began almost immediately. In Nuremberg, the world faced the machinery of evil in courts of law. Nazis were prosecuted not for the abstract idea of murder but for specific actions, logistics, orders, records, crimes against humanity. The meticulous records that had enabled genocide now became evidence for justice. Yet even as verdicts were delivered, questions lingered. How could ordinary men participate in such evil? How could societies allow this to happen? And how could the world prevent it from happening again? The Holocaust also left a mark on military, political, and ethical thinking. It exposed the dangers of ideology unchallenged, of obedience without conscience, of technology and bureaucracy divorced from morality. Historians and policymakers would study it for decades, extracting lessons on human behavior, the responsibility of nations, and the need for vigilance against prejudice. And yet, amid the darkness, stories of courage endure. Oskar Schindler, who saved over 1,000 Jews by bending the rules of the Nazi system. Raoul Wallenberg, issuing protective passports in Budapest. Those who hid children, forged documents, and risked execution to save lives. These acts remind us that even in the machinery of evil, individual choices could create ripples of hope. The Holocaust also reshaped memory and education. Memorials, museums, and survivor testimony ensure that history is not forgotten. Children visit exhibits where shoes, glasses, and hair tell a story beyond numbers. Teachers explain ideology, propaganda, and prejudice. Literature, films, and art convey the experience emotionally and visually, helping each generation confront the consequences of hatred. By the end, the Holocaust stands as both a warning and a testament. It reminds us that evil can be systematic, efficient, and bureaucratic, but also that humanity can resist in small, courageous ways. It forces reflection on morality, responsibility, and memory. Liberation did not erase the suffering, but it illuminated the resilience of the human spirit, the persistence of hope, and the necessity of remembering. And perhaps the most haunting question remains: how many more ordinary people might be capable of extraordinary evil if left unchecked? How does society ensure that such machinery never rises again? The answer is not simple. It requires vigilance, empathy, and understanding, not only of history but of the human heart. The Holocaust is a story of devastation, but also of enduring courage. It is a story of the worst and best of humanity. From the gates of Auschwitz to the diaries of children, from acts of resistance to trials for justice, it is a history that demands attention, reflection, and remembrance. That we remember the victims. We honor the survivors. And we study the past so that future generations may understand the fragility of civilization and the cost of silence. The smoke has cleared, the camps are empty, but the memory remains, etched into history, into conscience, and into the collective responsibility of the world. And in that memory lies the ultimate challenge, not simply to recount horror, but to carry its lessons forward, so that humanity may never again witness such darkness unchallenged.